to, well, 10 shekels or however much you want to give to tzedakah, and Gedaliah will tell us in a minute about the tzedakah. And Self and Dof, and please also a round of applause to Jody. Where's Jody? Jody?
Yay.
Thank you very much for hosting. And go for it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you very much. So I guess I didn't realize I was going to speak about the school. I guess you could also use the gold coins if you want to drop them in as well. But this school is called Hateneh. It's part of the Shekel organization. It's a school for children classified by Bituach Leumi as 100% handicapped. And it was a wonderful school for my late son, where he was almost 12 years of his life, and it was really tremendous blessing. There's no way I'd be able to have gone through what I went through without the help of my wife, and especially without the help of Hateneh. So that's the school. Okay. So, I was given a little framework as to how, this is my first time, by the way, ever here in this organization. And when I first heard the name, I really kind of was touched by it, because my grandfather, Shalom, when I used to go and visit him down in Fort Lauderdale, and we'd go Friday nights into the shul, the minute the rabbi would get up to speak, everyone would fall asleep. And his whole line was, Al tikre shmooze ela snooze. So I was hoping that this wouldn't necessarily be a snooze, but you can feel free to snooze if you want. I call it the hollow coconut effect when you hear the head like banging onto something. But it's completely okay, because like Rabbi Nachman says, you know, the other Nachman that is, that when you are in an environment where you are learning, even if you're asleep, the neshama, the soul, is still very much learning. So those of you a little bit familiar with the way I teach, I try to put a tremendous amount, I put a lot of time into preparing. I work mostly, my operating system is the Talmud. That's my platform. Anything that I do or quote, be it from a Zohar or a Medrash or whatever, I usually only do it if there's some tie-in back to a source inside the Talmud itself. And I also, besides put a lot of time into it, I often find that I cram a lot of material into a short amount of time. So if you find rather that I'm losing anybody or whatever, you can just like let me know, and I'll you know, as a New Yorker, I normally speak really fast, but I'll slow it down and try to go over it. But I thought that what would be kind of cool with Hanukkah coming, and it's really nice of you to get that like pre-Hanukkah feel with the coins and the napkins and all, would be to kind of take a more mystical look at what is fire. What do the sages say about fire? How do we understand fire? How does fire tie into creation? And then of course to bring that into the whole idea of Hanukkah itself. And that's why, as you see as the class will unfold, why as opposed to calling it simply the color of fire, it's more the colors of fire. Because everybody, I'm sure at some point in their life, has meditated staring at a candle and noticed that the candle has different colors and things of this nature. But it's really much more than that. In fact, the original concept of fire is that the color of true fire is invisible. And we know this even in the physical world, because the only thing which gives color to the fire is that which it's burning. But if there's nothing to burn but the fire is still there, it becomes a completely invisible fire. And we'll see a little bit later, that's why ironically in the Zohar, fire is actually equated with darkness. Where our normal association would be light, the Zohar will bring that concept of really fire as being the essence of darkness. Man, it's incredible, as always, as Reb Soloveitchik always said, don't call creation the Garden of Paradise, rather call it the Garden of Paradox. That the beauty of the Jewish approach to any subject is to see the irony and to see the conflict, and through the conflict build and come to the resolution. Because out of that resolution comes a higher level or a deeper level of wisdom. So my first source I start off with is the Gemara in Brachot. Actually, you know what? I'm going to have to just confess. I'm Ashkenazi. I learned in yeshivas, so my Hebrew is going to be a little bit more Ashkenazi than you might be. So I'll rewind that. Start off with the Gemara in Brachas. And the Gemara in Brachas tells us a very interesting thing. It says that there are three things which are never satisfied. One is the grave, one is the womb, and the other is earth. In fact, each one of these, when talking, the Mashal brings there, it talks about the idea of passion. And it says that the lowest level or the simplest level of passion is the passion for intimacy between a man and a woman. And more powerful passion, even more than that, is the power of the intimacy between rain and the earth, the desire for the water to impregnate the earth and to bring life out of the earth. And the highest, the most powerful of all of these levels of passion is what's referred to here as the grave, but it means the incredible desire of the soul to want to re-enter the body the moment a person dies. Like all of a sudden, like when you are no longer bound to these eyes, and suddenly you can see what it was really all about. Probably remember like when you were kids and you took a test and you would come up and you're about to put in the test and you notice on the table was like the teacher's answer test. And, can I just see that? And the teacher said, yeah, but you have to let go. And as soon as you let go of this, you could see it, but then you could never pick this back up. And there's that, right? So that's us all. We're all like that. There's that moment when all of a sudden it's game over and the credits roll and we see what it really was all about. And at that moment, what we wouldn't do to be able to come back inside the body and like do mitzvot and make things happen. So these are all levels of things which are never satisfied. But the Gemara adds on one more. And it says, and fire never says the word enough. That there's something about fire that it continually consumes. And as we see a little bit later, the different levels of fire, we'll understand why that is. But truth, because if you notice the nature of fire, there are two basic components, although there are four elements of creation. Avir, air, is really made up of other elements as well, because that's what the reisha of Avir, I don't want to go into this too much, but that's the reishas for Ruach and so on. But Mayim and fire, these are the two components that really are the catalyst and the basis of the world we live in. And the nature of fire is always to want to go up. And the nature of water is to always want to go down. And this relationship of fire going up and water coming down, these are the combinations of ultimately what we'll see called heaven. Shemayim is fire and water living together. And heaven is something we can create within ourselves, because the mind and the heart are also fire and water. And to be able to line up our emotional being with our intellectual understanding to create a harmony where they work as opposed to conflict with each other, this creates peace, this creates heaven within each one of us. So this level of fire, therefore, because it's always in a level of aliyah, of going higher and higher, there's never enough, because it's infinite. Because there is no end to the infinite. You know, I mean, with Hanukah around the corner, maybe just cut this part out of the video, it also, to me, brings back to mind Christmas. And I often think a lot about how God, in His infinite wisdom, did not give the Jews Christmas, because we would be like totally ape, you know, like how many bells and how much tinsel, and what if you don't have a chimney, and if you do have a chimney, and what's the shear of eggnog, and it would just be like, oh, you know, completely all over this thing. I mean, a shulchan aruch like this on, well, shouldn't do that, sorry. But a really big shulchan aruch on this whole thing. But in terms of understanding this idea of fire and understanding this idea of joy that comes into the world, I always think it's actually very beautiful that there's this Hanukkah Christmas kind of overlay where a very large percentage of the world is actually happy. They're in a joyful mood. And I often thought, gee, it'd be really nice if we could extend that and continue that all the way around and everywhere that it goes. But the point of it is that when we talk, coming back to fire, we talk about this idea of the infinite. So in the same way that we are always like this in terms of like holidays, so the Medrash asks, where is the end of the universe? Right? So immediately we're out there with our little like measuring tools and this and that, sonic wave and so on. It says it's the tip of your middle finger. In other words, as far as you can reach, that's how big the universe is. If you expand your mind, the universe has just gotten bigger. Meaning to say that the universe has no end, it is infinite. So as long as the driving force within a person becomes fire, passion, desire, a drive, hear the clock ticking, life is finite. There's so much that we can do within every single minute of our lives. And if we become driven by that power of enough, never enough, then we are able to continually, while we are still alive, be able to reach to great heights. And this is why the Gemara in Shabbos tells us that the human soul is also called a candle. As the Lubavitcher Rebbe once pointed out, that the candle has the wick, which is like the neshama, and has the wax, which is like the body. But the only time it fulfills itself is with fire. It's only once the candle is lit that the tafkid, the purpose of the candle, has been fulfilled. And so therefore, somebody once said to me, when Kodesh Baruch Hu said, although Rashi learns that God was talking to the angels, and he said, come, let us make man, really, he was talking to man. He was saying, listen, man, I'm going to give you everything you need. I'm going to give you life, vascular system, respiratory system, oxygen, everything you need. There's only one thing I can't give you, as the Gemara says, Irat Shemayim. Kol b'dei Shemayim chutz me Irat Shemayim. I can't give you the fear of God. The Amshanav Rebbe points out why, because God doesn't fear himself, so he can't give you what he doesn't have. But the point of it is that God says to man, together we can create a mensch. And so God creates the component of the candle, each one of us, but we have to light the fire. And by lighting that fire, our soul comes to life. Now it's interesting when we note, this is kind of like, you know, if you ever go to Sheva Brachas and you ever stuck for Vort, it's like Sheva Bracha Vort 101. Oh, there's Ish and Isha, and when they get married, they create the name of God. Okay, fine. Let's ramp it up a little. Let's go to 201. Where's the rest of the name of God? It's only half the name. Well, that's the man and the female, and I'll leave the rest to your imagination. But that together, the soul and the body, creates the full name of God when done in holiness. But what's really interesting about the name man, Ish, and woman, Isha, is that they both have the word fire, Eish, Aleph, Shin, inside of them. Except the woman has more passion because hers is actually the word Eish, whereas the man is divided by the letter Yud. And to explain that what is the difference between male fire and female fire, is that man's fire is Or Seichel, Aleph, Shin. It's the illumination of the mind. It's not to say, of course, that women are not also expected to have illuminations of the mind, but since women have Bina Yetera, they have a higher level of intuit, they don't have the same intellectual struggle necessarily as a man may have, which is why the word Zachor is related to the Zecher, because this is the idea of the man needing to remember all of the time. And memory is a double-edged sword. It goes, remember what happened and remember what you need to do. And this is why the word also spells Zach Rosh, a clear head. That's the nature and the challenge of a man, is to remove the noise and the confusion, have an illuminating light that shows the way to go. By the woman, the challenge is different. Now again, this is not based on men versus women. This is based on the idea that Adam as human being means male, female as one human. That the title, when God called them Adam, means that only a full human being is male, female as one, living together. I know sometimes like a three-legged race, but at least it's the idea of trying to live together. So the female's part of the tikkun, therefore, becomes Aleph Shin, Emunah Shlema, the aspect of the heart, to, if I could use the popular movie today, to fill the void. To be able to pick up the slack and to become the backbone of Emunah, which is what the Jewish woman all throughout history have had much more levels of Emunah than the men have been able to show. So that fire of the female is Aleph Shin of Emunah Shlema, of the man is Or Seichel, and together these are the fires that combine the mind and the heart together to create the Achdut. In the Gemara Psachim, it mentions a very interesting thing. Gemara Psachim says that the creation of fire was created on Motzi Shabbat, right? That's why we make Havdalah from a new candle, and we're careful on Yom Kippur, although we also, because it's called Shabbat, we also make Havdalah, but we're very careful to use a fire that existed before Yom Kippur, because it's unique to Shabbat, that Motzi Shabbat, Saturday Night Live, that is when fire was created. And it's sort of funny because we have an idea that nothing was created except for within the 7 days of creation. And if you look, there's nothing else that's ever mentioned. There are all these little funky things in Pirkei Avot that were stuck in at the last moment. Friday, Banish Shmosh, almost forgot tongues. Here's tongues, right? So they're like all these things that like God creates on Friday, but there's nothing that. I almost forgot fire, guys. Gee, I'm really sorry. Shh, I'll just slip it in here, Motzi Shabbos. Not like that, right? Okay. So there had to be a kavana. Why Motzi Shabbos? Why fire Saturday night? I'm sure Adam and Eve could have used it, on Shabbos, making a little chillin', right? God hated chillin', must be awesome. But like, why Saturday night? So the simple answer is coming back to the earlier idea. God wants to make man partner. So the fire, the passion, is our part of the partnership. So therefore, the fire is created on Saturday night, because now God's portion of creation has been completed. Now it's up to you, man. You go out and you begin to create on Motzi Shabbos. But there's a deeper idea. And the deeper idea is that Motzi Shabbat was the 8th day. There are the 7 days of the natural order of creation, but there's a supernatural 8th day. We relate to this 8th day, of course, on Brit Milah, when we circumcise our children in order to connect them to the infinite and not to be merely in the finite world. And this idea of the 8th day means that there is something in the nature of Tikkun Eish, of the fixing of the fire, which will be about the entire rectification of all of creation. And so therefore, when it starts to talk about this idea of the 8th day, which we'll get to a little bit later, the Baal Shem Tov points out in a very beautiful way, because obviously here 8, you start to relate to Hanukah, which is where we're going, but you have the word Oreach, which is a guest. The word Oreach is the Or Chet, the light of the 8. And that the idea is that in this world, we are guests. We are of this world, but we are not, we are in this world, but not of this world. We are neshamas from higher worlds. As the Zohar says, when a person is born into this world, it's like a sun that has been created. But when a person, if they navigate properly through the obstacle courses and challenges of what this life has to offer, when they leave this world, they can be like an entire galaxy of light. It's all our capability, all within this opportunity of Olam Asiyah, in a world of chance and production. So therefore, what happens is, that light comes down through the 8 levels of the Rakiyas, which we'll get to in a few seconds. Really, there's 7, but therefore the 8th is the highest level Rakiya, which is the infinite. And it dwells in this world in order to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to illuminate the darkness with light. Okay? So now, when we look in the Gemara Chagiga, we find there that the Gemara talks about what are the 7 levels of heaven. I don't want to go into the whole Gemara, but if you have a chance, all these things are definitely worth looking into. There's an amazing story about a little teeny person who said, oh, I'm going to come up there with God and punch you in the nose. And they said, what? You're going to come up here? Do you know how far up here is? And again, with the little measurements, well, let me tell you exactly how far it is. So 500 years just to get to the first level, and there's like a little layer, another 500 years, and so on and so on. So it's really far. And then when you think you finally made it all the way up to heaven, you're only at the heels of the Chayot. And even there, they like almost triple the amount of distance that you've traveled until then, and so on and so on. But in simple form, the 7 levels are, the first level is called the curtain. Inside the curtain exists daylight. Then above the curtain is called the sky. These are just loose translations, of course. And inside the sky exists the sun, the moon, and the stars. And above the sky exists the grist mill. And above the grist mill exists the residence, which is also known as Shemayim. And above the residence is called the abode, which is where night and angels, and also called Shemayim, exists. And then above that is called the storehouse, which is where the snow, the hail, the heavy rains, dew, winds, and smoke are, until finally the 7th level, which is called the plains. And beyond the 7th level, that is where the private abode of Kodesh Baruch Hu. Again, all this is kavayachal, only metaphor in order to teach ideas, but that is ki'ilu, where God dwells, and the 8th level, above the 7 levels. And the Gemara Chagiga points out that these levels are all behind, when you come to the highest level, all behind doors of fire. Because there is something about the fire which is the separating point between creation and beyond creation. In contrast with that, the fire of the highest level of heaven, the Gemara also in Psachim points out that the fire of Gehenem was created on the 2nd day of creation. Now why? Because on the 2nd day of creation, the word good is absent. There's no good, right? So there's no good, and in the absence of good is created this concept called hell. And why is there no good? Because this is a time of separating. And anything which has to do with separation, right? God divided the waters and so on. Anytime there is a separation, in and of itself, it is not good. But we also know from the laws of Shabbat that if a person does a negative act on Shabbat, like breaking something, it's not a violation of Shabbat, we call stira. But if you break something in order to immediately fix it and make it better than it was before it was broken, so of course the positive act of building the item is a violation of Shabbat, But now even the negative act is called positive because it's combined with a positive act. Since the negative act was the predecessor and necessary in order to be able to create something positive, even the negative can be converted into positive. This is a very important idea, because it means when we look in our own lives and find very depressing and negative experiences, well, I'm sure maybe 2 or 3 of you probably can relate to this, but don't laugh that loud. But when you feel and look at these moments, if you're able to connect them to understanding later in one's life how something could have grown positive from that, then even the negative becomes positive. And since HaKadosh Baruch Hu does everything in this world as a creative act, as Yirmiyahu writes, then even the negative acts have to be positive, even though we can't see them. And this is why, coming back to the Gemara Brachot, teaches us that in the end of days, possibly after resurrection of the dead, unless you're from the school of Shimon Bar Yochai, so there will be a time when all of the blessings in our lives, when we said Baruch Dayan Emet, we will now say on the very same event, Tov u'Meitiv. It won't be that we will say it about other people, because Chas v'Chalil, to ever judge another person, and nobody knows what another person goes through. But it'll be about our own lives. We will be able to say this. We will be able to find that within all that darkness was incredible light. And this is hinted at even in the concepts and the words that we use for darkness. For example, the word tuma, which is associated with impurity, is really connected to the word atum, which means hidden. Those of us that were here in the Gulf will remember a cheder atum, our hiding rooms. So atum means that there's tameh, but there's something hidden inside of it, which is why the Zohar says that when God created, all that was created was light and hidden light, or haganuz. And the idea is that because it's all light, but some of that light is hidden from us. And that which hides that light is called choshech. It's called the darkness. Our sages tell us that when the Torah says, and God created the darkness, it says that this is the Greek nation. That Greek wisdom is called darkness. Now, this is a little hard to understand. It's hard to understand because as Jews, our lives are not about negating, but about integrating. The whole concept of the menorah is about teaching us that it's not God versus science. Science is God's. It's all God's. There's the opposite in Judaism isn't left versus the right. There's truth in both, even politically. There's truth in both. Opposites in Judaism is the center versus the circumference. There is echad and there is acher. And they are both powerful forces from the word ach, which is a brother, which binds, which pulls. So therefore, this creates Yetzer Hara to pull me away from being who I am, and it creates Yetzer Tov to pull me back to being who I am. If I focus on the echad, I stay aligned. If I look away from the echad, I go other than where I am supposed to be. And so therefore, that challenge is also the challenge between being pulled to the darkness as opposed to being pulled to the light. And the way that the menorah was designed is that the 3 candles on the 2 sides of the center of the candelabra, their wicks were faced towards the middle. Meaning that all of the wisdoms of the 6 days of creation need to be integrated into the service of God. And in fact, this was a very fundamental teaching after the first Holocaust survivor named Noah, when he came out of the Teva and saw the entire world incinerated. And he was a man who saw it coming, warned it was going to happen, and survived it. He turned around and said, okay, I have my children. They're going to be the ones who are going to rebuild this world. Let me put them in the order in which through this they will create a harmony of all of mankind to live together as one. And so how did he try to create this harmony? He tried to create it because he said that the nature of Shem, which is shame, which is name, which is like the spiritual element of the person, that has to be the house. That has to be the infrastructure where everything takes place inside. And therefore he put Yafet in the tent of Shem, meaning he made Yafet, which ultimately became Greece, or Yafet's grandson, Yavan, became Greece, and therefore brilliant man, human wisdom had to be put within the idea of focus on God. Not that God becomes isolated to church on Sunday and it's really man's world and here's a little moment we allocate to God. But no, it's rather God's world and all of man's wisdom is put inside. Because to really be a religious person is not only not to stifle creativity, but it actually means to be completely creative. Because A, you have to mimic God, and God is the ultimate creator. So B, you realize that any creative capability you have within you was embedded in your software when you were born. And therefore it's given to you not as a gift, but as a responsibility to bring it out into the world and to share it. And so therefore, actual understanding of a relationship to God is meant to enhance creativity, not to squash it. There might be situations that appear just the opposite, but we're not going to talk about those environments tonight. But the main idea is that really when a person understands this, then they understand that all of their faculty, symbolized by Yavan, serves God through him. Now, once you have that, then you have Cham. Cham is fire. Cham is power. Cham now becomes the servant. But so what? If I'm serving somebody who themselves is only a servant to God, I am a servant to God. And that's why the servant to the servant of God, Eliezer, Avram's servant, winds up with more airtime in the Bible than probably anybody. It's unbelievable. In a Bible that doesn't waste a letter, oh, how many times do we have to hear this story? Right? Why? Because he is precious. Here is a man from a cursed people, and he just ignored the handicap and played his cards to the extent where he became one of the holiest of all people, Eliezer. Amazing. So therefore, we understand that this is what Noah tried to teach us. When it goes out of that control, when it becomes shame in the house of Yavan, then that power of Cham becomes burn, baby, burn. All society comes crumbling down. There becomes hatred. There becomes anger. Why should I possibly serve you? Why are you any better than me? But if you're serving God, then I'm also serving God. By serving you, I'm also serving God. What difference is it? But if it's serving you, who are you? And that's where it falls apart. And this is what Noah realized. So Noah tried to order a world in which there would be an opportunity to create this harmony. Now, let's do one more idea, and then you'll see how all these were not random stories, but there was actually some schematic I was working from here. In the idea of discussing Hanukah, you have Beis Shammai comes along, and he says that you count from 8 candles down to 1 candle. And Hillel says you count from 1 candle up to 8 candles. And of course, this is where things get really funky in Jewish nature, because, you know, it says, and this and that are both the will of God. Huh? Like, huh? How do you get 1 to 8 and 8 to 1, and that's both the will of God? So I've explained this before, but I'll repeat it because those of you who haven't heard before, it's a very beautiful idea, and you can use it in conflict resolution as well. When you have real opposites going at loggerheads, seemingly in completely different directions, not as much, I wish I was an octopus because I could use a third hand. But if you watch the motion here, right, it's a circle. See? So in a circle, it's really going the same direction. Watch. In a circle, it's really going the same direction. It's just when you cut out this area, it's going that way. And when you cut out this area, it's going that way. But that's all the same way. So it's only when a person actually begins to see the unity and the fullness and the oneness of everything, and see how the opposites are really 2 sides of the whole, suddenly they are of the same issue, but in different aspects. Shammai, almost like a play on the word Shemayim, if you will, but there are other interesting ideas of what Shammai refers to. Shammai, we know, the law will only become like him in the Yemot HaMashiach, in the days of the Messiah, then that will become the law like Shammai. Because Shammai always represents the highest heavenly perfect world of din, where the din is just, and man can accomplish such greatness. Hillel is practical. He's down here on the real world with the rest of us. Yeah, that's all very nice, but meanwhile I live here on earth, and that's why the law follows Hillel. Because Hillel is about, take what we have, let's do our best, and let's try to elevate it. Shammai is, take what there is, and let's bring it down. So Shammai is, how does the higher light of the 8th infinite world penetrate through the Sheva Rekiot, through the 7 levels, and saturate our lives? That's what Shammai is all about. How to bring the light down. Hillel is how to bring the light up. How do we, each one of us, if we're a candle, how do we just keep lighting little candles and bring this as a huge light upwards to heaven? But now the problem becomes with Shammai, that Shammai has to justify. I'm just going to go Talmud mode for a minute here. It might be a little boring, but it'll only be for a few seconds, don't worry. So just on a simple Talmudic question, the question is, where do we have a precedent? Because we have a concept that anything that is of holy nature only goes up. It doesn't come down. So how could Shammai say that it goes down? Where's a precedent? He says, oh, I have a precedent, Sukkah. On Sukkah, when we bring the bulls as sacrifices in the temple, the numbering goes down. So on a simple Talmudic level, what he's done is justified through precedent that there is such an idea of holiness can come down. What's really going on here? What's this coming into Sukkah all about? Then watch, this is how it all comes together. On Sukkah, which I know seems like 1,000,000 years ago, or 500,000 internet minutes ago, but Sukkah is, as the Vilna Gaon points out, the word Sukkah actually includes the law of the Sukkah. I talked a little bit on Sukkah, but I'm going to repeat it here because it ties beautifully into Hanukah. So the laws of Sukkah are in the letters. The minimal Sukkah that you could have is the hay, which is 2 walls and a tefach. Then you have the 3 walls, and then you have the 4 walls. Everybody knows this, so I'll just kind of zip through it. But we also know that Sukkah is a time, the language of the Midrash is very beautiful, of ladling emunah, of being able to ladle faith, to be able to increase our faith in God. That's the little incubator that we go into during those 7 days, and which we pop out on the other side, hopefully elevated in our faith in God. And so what is the process of building faith in God? So if your life is all about 50-50, maybe it was God, maybe it wasn't God, I don't really know, 50-50, you're not in the Sukkah. But as soon as it's 51-49, poof, you're in the Sukkah. That's the hay. The hay is you got 2 walls, that's your 50-50, I'm not in any Sukkah. But as soon as, poof, I have that other little piece, I now have 51, I'm in a Sukkah. But what is the hay? It's the hand of a person, right? Hay, 5 fingers, 5 letters, and 5 numerical value of hay, many things. Also, hay is a yud and a daled, which is yad. There are many references to hand and the letter hay. But the idea is as follows, that the first level of faith in God is where you see the hand of God in your life. It's still your life. Hey, this is my life. But whoa, God just butted in, right? So I see God coming in, and it's like, whoo, incoming. And when I see God coming in, that rocks my world, but it's my world, but God's in it. Now I go a little further. I come to the next level, which is the letter kaf, which is another part of the hand, the palm, the kaf. Now I realize, no, it's not God's finger in my life. I am in God's world. I'm now in God's hand. That's a complete next level reversal of a new understanding of what faith is all about. That level of coming there, that's the letter kaf. That level of faith is now, you know what? I'm into the mitzvahs, I'm into Shabbos, I'm into all these things, I'm into things that aren't mitzvahs, but I think the mitzvahs, whatever, I'm a hoo-hoo. It's like that joke about when it says the Jews came back to God and said, we're going to return the Torah. And God said, well, okay, I'll take back everything but the chumras. And, well, why not? He says, I'm only going to take back what I gave you. So you have all this idea of standing inside the world of God, but there's a 4th wall which is missing. That's the Holocaust. That's the little kid, God forbid, killed by a car. That's an innocent person in an act of terrorism was killed. Where's God? Where's God there? I can't find God in that space. I really can find God in Shabbat. I can find God in my learning or my chesed, but I can't find God in hell. That's the missing wall. That's the darkness. That's the fire, which was the choshech that was created in division of the 2nd day that rips me apart from God. And then finally, I make the last level. And the last level is complete ani ma'amin b'emunah shlema, that I believe completely in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and that's when the hand closes and becomes a samech, where you are completely somech on the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's complete faith. But there are 2 levels of faith which are missing in the world. There's that level which is the first of merely seeing God coming into my life, and then there's those people of a greater level, but I still don't see God in hell. The job of the illumination of the Jewish people is, as the Gemara says, when a neshama comes into this world, it gets darker and darker and darker and darker. And it's afraid because it's missing Tati. It's missing God in heaven. It's missing all that light. And then all of a sudden the Gemara says, whoo, it sees the menorah. And when it sees the menorah, it realizes that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, is in this world. And then it can come down like the Orachet. It can come down like the illuminated light into this world because it knows that even in hell, we call it earth, right? Even in hell, there is still, I told you about that laugh. Even in hell, there is God. Because God is everywhere. Everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Even in those things which we will only be able to repeat, Tovo Metiv, on the Dayan Emet, which we live through, even though we can't do it now, we know that it's hidden, it's atum, it's tuma on the outside, but there's or haganuz, there's hidden light on the inside. And how do we experience in our own lives bringing that light out? The olive. The olive and the grape. These are the two things that King David refers to often in the beginning of his Tehillim, his Psalms. He speaks about the crushing of the olive and the crushing of the grape. And these are actually, on a Torah level, the only two foods which are really obligated in the tithes and other agricultural laws of the foods are these two, because these are the two that only through their crushing do they bring out their greatness. And if you look at the word olive, it's very interesting. The word zayit is the word Zion, Yud, Tuf. Tuf is the numerical value of 400. I won't get too much into Kabbalah, I'll just simply say 400 is always a number associated with the ultimate of Tuma. Why? You saw last week's Parsha, Esav comes with 400 soldiers. You see the Gemara of Avodah Zorah says that Abraham had his own tractate of Avodah Zorah, had 400 chapters. There are many, many references, but that 400 always symbolizes the ultimate, i.e. the end of the alphabet of that Tuma. And yet inside the word Zayit is Yud Zayin, is the number 8, and it's also the number together as the idea of being able to bring the infinite light of 8, of the 1 and the 7. That idea of bringing the infinite light dwells inside of the Zayit. That inside there is Yud Zayin, which is Tov, is that idea of goodness hidden inside of there. And this is like the idea of the Pach, which was hidden under the ground, which all of a sudden raised up back to the menorah, lit the candles, and created the miracle. Because it pierced through the world of nature and the bounds of those things which we think, oh my gosh, I can't do that, until we have the passion and the fire to realize we can explode with life. And we can do tremendous amounts of things in our powers, through our prayers, and through our chesed, and through many of the things that we do. And so to take it to one more step, there's another thing about Hanukah. Hanukah is called Zot Hanukah. The last day of Hanukkah, according especially in the Hasidic world, this is the real completion of all of that which began on Rosh Hashanah. The real judgment ends on the last day of Hanukkah. The end of judgment is Hanukkah. Well, if you take a look at the word Zot again, what do you find inside there? You find this same idea of the koach of Tumah, of the concept of the tet of Tumah, and you also find there that same idea of 8, of that idea of illumination. What does it mean? The end of judgment. Well, there's two ways to look at end of judgment. The simple level is the judge goes bonk with a gavel and you get the little petek, like, what's your din? But there's another way to look at the end of judgment. And that is a much higher level. That there's no longer a need for judgment. Because now the world has come to peace. Now the world has taken, if I may quote Yeshayahu in English, has beaten its swords into plows, and it is a world where there's no longer any war. Those of you who are in Daf Yomi will be getting to these psukim in a little bit soon. But once we come to a world of complete peace and harmony, this is a world without judgment. And this is hinted at in the word Hanukah. Hanukah is the word chen, chet nun, which is also the name Noach, because Noach means to come to rest, and it's the word chen, which is grace, and that's what the Torah says about Noah, that he found grace and peace within himself, and that's the inner harmony we can come to. And then it's the letters Kaf Hey. Yes, the simple letter means that the Hashmanayim rested on the 25th of this month, and that's when the war ended. But on a much deeper level, look what's happening. when those two letters, Kaf Hey, those are the two letters of the two levels of the Sukkah that are not complete in their faith. The Hey and the Kaf. When Hanukah, when we come to being able to mashlim, to complete the faith which is lacking in the Kaf and the Hey, then that means we have brought the illumination into the entire world. When Shammai is equating the idea of the bulls on Sukkah, he's talking about the 70 bulls relating to the 35 nations of Ishmael and the 35 nations of Esav. What he means to say is that that power, which is so powerful, that of the bull, which is so resistant to the will of God, but now it can be connected to the light of the infinite coming down through the 8 days, that this is the completion of all of Din. The completion is that now, and thus becomes the period when law follows Shammai, because now we live in a world of peace, of Chan, of Chain, that we've come to Noach, we've come to this level of resting. And just to break it down one last level, and I'll stop, if you look at the name Noach itself, it illustrates this. What is the name? You have 8 and 50. You have the Nun Shari Bina, the 50 gates of wisdom, which are the doorways to the infinite, which is symbolized always in 50. That's why we go from Passover to Shavuot. We count 50 days, the 50th day being Shavuot, because now we receive the infinite Torah. And it's all through bringing the Chet, the idea of the light, through those 50 portals where everything becomes illuminated. And this is why the letter Chet is also associated with Chita, which is wheat, which according to the Vilna Gaon was the actual tree in the Garden of Eden was wheat, because wheat is associated as the food of wisdom, because to process wheat there are 10 steps. This is why you use your 10 fingers to hold the bread, to go through the Esser Sfirot of creation of bread. And therefore that transformation of making milchama, of war, into lechem, which is the same word as the transformation of the choshech into the or, to show that there is no darkness. There is no fourth wall where you do not see God. And that happens by bringing that 8th light all the way through the 50 portals into our worlds. And this is the real secret of Hanukah. And that's why it's Zot HaBracha, and that's why it's Zot Hanukah. Because through reaching that level of being able to dispel the mythology of the world of nature and understand it in the context that it's subordinate to the infinite world of God's miracles, this will be that which has kept us as a people, and this will be that which will continue us forever as a people until all the people of the world together come to Yerushalayim. Toda Rabba. Actually, it's only like 3 of the 9 pages, but I know.
We're with you.
Are you supposed to come and say something now?
No, we have
I had a question,
Oh,
but I
questions.
forgot.
Oh, yes, please.
I'm gonna thank you.
Please. Questions, yes.
How did you, I lost you somewhere.
Uh-oh.
Went to Noach and Shem and Ham and Yefet. Where did you get the building? Where is the formation from?
Okay. Right, you're right. The truth is, what I suddenly realized was I was only like that much into the material, and I saw the clock, so I kind of jumped through. But you're right, I would have fleshed it out more, and I'll do it for you now. There's a very beautiful idea that, as we mentioned, Yafet's grandson was Yavan, which is Greece. Right. And we also mentioned that Greece was called the darkness. And I didn't go further on that point, but had I gone further on that point, I would have asked the question, but how could Greece be darkness when Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said that a Megillah can even be written in Greek and read in shul and you're Yotzi? And that Greek is many times considered one of the highest, most beautiful languages by the rabbis, considered as such. And there's the incredible hug and embracement between Alexander and Shimon HaTzadik when he first came to Yerushalayim. So where's this darkness that the Torah is talking about? So the answer is that it's only darkness when it's outside of the light. In other words, when that becomes the guiding light of the world, that's darkness. But when it's inside God's camp, then it's brilliant and beautiful. And this is shown in a very interesting way. Because the nature of Mark Twain's famous, where is that nation, I never remember the whole thing. But anyhow, the famous idea in many societies, you see societies, they come and they go. And this is symbolized by the word Yavan. Because Yavan is Yud Vav Nun Sofit. So the Yud means, oh, I got a great idea, communism. And now the Vav is the body. Let's go make it happen. Let's go, build the farms and whatever. And then after a while, it's like the Nun Sofi, it sinks into the ground and it's gone until the next whatever comes along. And all of these things go through sight. What's that?
When you put a tzaddik in front of it.
Oh, thank you. That was it. Bingo. And that's Tzion. That tzaddik is Tzion. That idea is that when the tzaddik is there, meaning that the neshama is in the right place, yes, the Jewish people will also go through those cycles, but we will always come back because we're connected first to the tzaddik. Exactly. So that's why I was going from there. And then, of course, from there, I had the little sneak for the end, which was to show you how really Noah and Sukkah are integrated into Hanukah. So, yes.
Very nice.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
First of all, you mentioned something about Shimon Bar Yochai and Tchias Mating that I didn't know about. Number one. So if you want to go and explain that. And also, I've been thinking, I mean, I don't know what it's like all over the world, but like in America in particular, and even the Hanukkah was known as the Chiloni Chag. It's maybe it's easy, all you have to do is really light the candles, sing a song, maybe you sing, maybe you don't. If you're Chabad, you don't, apparently. But another easy one, easy Chag is Purim. In as much as we enjoy it, we get drunk, we do the mitzvahs or whatever, but we party, we have a good time. And when you, what was that? But when you go into it, especially I certainly understood the whole Purim and Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur and everything. So that was, but this has actually told me there's much more to Hanukkah than meets the eye. Than there is, and even the fact that you've got the people. I've got Americans and Brits who are saying, yeah, well we don't keep a lot, but yeah we do Hanukkah, and I'm thinking, why? But actually, if anything, this is gonna bring light. Not only to the nations, but to our nation.
Yes, absolutely.
So
I'll tell you the little thing. This is a little story that is one of my favorite little stories. It's kind of a very lit story, so if there are any Hasidim in the crowd, I ask for forgiveness in advance. But the story is 3 Hasidim are arguing over whose Rebbe is greater. And I'll make the short version. This one says, my Rebbe is so great, he does this amazing miracle, and my Rebbe, he does this, and the third one says, ah! And while they're arguing, so suddenly a student of the Chafetz Chaim comes by and he says, excuse me, gentlemen, but my rabbi is greater than all of your Rebbes. And they're like shocked. What? Because the last one, I guess I should have filled it in, the third Chassid said, my rabbi is so great that whatever he says, God does, and tzaddik goes and so on. And so he says, yes, because my rabbi, the Chafetz Chaim, is so great, whatever God says he does. So this is an idea where, because we live here and it's only natural as earthlings, we ascribe and aspire for things that are sort of way beyond us. So we're fascinated and we're enchanted by that which is like, we call it Kabbalah and so on because it's so far out there. But what's God's Kabbalah? So God's mystical Kabbalah is us. Because we're the Bat Ayin. We're the one space, if you're an infinite entity, then quantity is insignificant, right? Remember when you were like a kid, you're first learning math, and the teacher put a ray and a line and said, which is further? Oh, it's the line because it goes infinite in both directions, and no, they're both infinite. And then, what do you mean, what about that part to like behind the dot, right? But the point is, infinite is infinite. So quantity is insignificant to God. Quality is significant. So what's the most amazing quality in the world? That space where there's free will. And so that which we as human beings do is the ultimate focus of the infinite creator, so to speak. So therefore, that which is furthest from God, if you will, is greater to God. So that which is Torah Sheba'al Peh and man-made holidays, i.e. Hanukkah, Purim, in a certain way, become even holier than the ones that were biblically decreed, because they're further from God. And so God says, wow, look, they're even doing that. They're even doing that. And so when you have these Chiloni Jews, actually I'm supposed to give a class, I think, on Hanukkah at the Tulip something piece, something. And the name of the the name of the class. I called the class is called "Is Freedom Free?" And I was going to get into this whole idea of chiloni. But anyhow, coming back to your first question about Shimon Bar Yochai and Tchias HaMesim. So there, it's actually, we say this on Pesach. It's by Rabbi Eliezer. The question is, what does the word call in the Mishnah mean? Kol halaylot. When we say, can you thank God in this world or in the next world? So according to the opinion, call means physically the night, right? I didn't know I could say Kriya Shema until I said call. Call includes the night. So the other opinion is no, call means the next world. So that argument of the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer is the same idea found in Shabbos and Brachas as the argument between Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and the Chachamim, which is, to what point can man rely really on God and not function in the natural world? So Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was of the higher world, where he said that man could just learn Torah 24/7 and has the right to do that, and it'll just come to him. And who will plow the fields? Other people will plow the fields. And the Chachamim said, no, many people tried and failed, only a few people can do that. The rest of us, we have to go and live in this world and have time dedicated to the Torah. So according to that camp, therefore, we will never get in this lifetime to a realization of how those things which were dayin emet are actually tov u'meitiv. That we would only have to be when there is no more laws of nature. And when would that be? Post-resurrection of the dead. In that state of consciousness, having torn asunder all worlds of nature, there will be no fourth wall, no barriers, and then everything we see, we will see in the context of how it was good. But the Reb Shimon Bar Yochai approach is what I was referring to, is there are individuals, Zusha, other great Rabbanim, who reached the tremendous level of simcha, even in this world and even in this life, because they were able to makabel their isurim through ahava, like Rabbi Akiva, and so on. That was what.
And in English that will be for our foreign listeners who are going to be watching the
Hi
video.
out there. Yeah.
Can you just say the last
What
bit
is
in
Isrim
English?
Yahava in English?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, that part. Wasn't sure what I said in Hebrew. Able to accept suffering through joy. But it's interesting though, because I'm sure you must know the famous story of Zusha. They came into the Chazam in Lublin and they said to him, why do good people suffer? And he said, well, you should go ask Zusha, he's over there. I mean, nobody suffers like Zusha suffers. And Zusha's, how do I know? I never suffered a day in my life.
Right.
Because suffering doesn't merely mean the process, it means the perspective. It's not the process, right? If I go out, I shouldn't say this because my wife is here, so I won't use that analogy. I was going to say if I went out and exercised, she knows I'm not exercising. But if I went out and exercised, so I would like really go and, pump the pavement and move the ball and do the shot and all of that. And I really would have sweat. But if I had to do the same thing breaking rocks, let's say the same ATP breakdown in my muscles exactly even, one would be horrible work and one would be really fun. So it's not the experience, it's the perspective. So therefore, there are Rabbanim and Tzaddikim who were able to turn the outsiders, and rightfully so, when the Talmidim said to Rabbi Akiva, my gosh, and he said, what are you talking about, my gosh, I waited my whole life for this opportunity. So he could say that about himself. Rabbi Israel Salant said, Rabbi Israel Salant said many wonderful things. But one of the many wonderful things that he said was, when something bad happens to me, I have to ask, what is God telling me? When something bad happens to you, I have to believe that there is no God, and I have to do everything I can to help you. So it's only about a reflection of my own self-growth that I'm allowed to do that. Never chas v'chalila to say to another person, I'll tell you what God had in mind. That's an ultimate chutzpah, God forbid. But in terms of myself, I can do that. And that's where we see great individuals who've raised to that level, but I don't know if that's incumbent upon us to do. So, any other questions? That was really good. I'm so happy you got that. You saw it coming down the pike?
I must have heard it before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I saw it as one-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all the lines, and then with the tzadi in front of it, you gave it other dimensions, so to speak. Let's say you have from a physical to a spiritual,
Right.
so to speak.
Yes. That was very nice. Tov. All right. So, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
That was very nice.
What's the name of the school again?
Hatene.
Hatene.
I can send you the email.
Yeah, no, so that also for our foreign listeners.
Oh, Hatene. I know how to say it in English, sorry.
So 10 shekels once again to Hatene, which is Jerusalem school for kids.
Challenged children.
Challenged Kids. And anybody who's not on the Shir and Shmooze, either give me your email address or we're on Facebook, and 10 shekels to charity, and thank you once again to Jody.
Thank you, Jody.
Hopefully we're going to have a shiur next Sunday. Any
Happy
ideas?
Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Gedaliah can do the other half of his lecture.
Unfortunately,
Sorry.
yeah, that's it.
Shkach.